The public can participate in this meeting remotely, but not in person by calling 1-312-626-6799, webinar ID 929-1042-4397, or can join via Zoom by going to the Cumberland Schools website to the events calendar and clicking on the Zoom link. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda, and in compliance with Governor's Executive Order 21-21 dated March 3rd, 2021, discussion or vote of whether there is public access to the meeting through adequate alternative means. And Mr. Chandler, are we open?
Yes, we are.
Excellent, thank you. So I just need a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. DeMonica.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rogalski and Ms. Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it 6-0. So I will now hand it over to you, Mr. DeMonica.
Great, thank you. Before we get going on the meeting, I just want to clarify some information for everyone that's in attendance. As you're aware, on Tuesday night, the superintendent had just gotten the information from the ESSA people about the grant money that is going to be available. And on Wednesday, Mr. Damana asked me for a little bit more time, so they made sure that everything they did with the ESSA 2 grant money was correct. And so we asked the mayor for an additional 1 week's time to submit the budget to him if we needed it, and he granted it. And speaking with Superintendent Mitchell today, they're still working on that ESSA 2 money grant that, by all accounts, once it's done correctly, and we know it's done correctly, it has to be sent in and signed off on before we get the grant money. And that grant money has nothing to do with the budget request that we will make from the town that was on Tuesday night by the superintendent. So if you're ready tonight, we can proceed and vote to approve the budget. If there are no further questions that need to get answered for you, so we could proceed with that as well. But the superintendent did inform me today that, you know, it'll still take some time for that grant money and get approval from the federal government to use it. So I know we're all concerned last week, and Mr. Damana made a great presentation about, you know, what we're going to do with mental health and trying to get the extra help for the children because of this COVID situation. And I think we're all grateful for what we saw. And I don't see a need to change anything tonight unless there are many questions from the school committee tonight or from the public. So with that being said, I can turn this over to Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Prignano.
So if I may just piggyback on what Mr. DeMonica just said. First of all, good evening, everyone. And those guests who are in attendance this evening. So just to piggyback on what Mr. DeMonica said, if you know, the tentative plans that we shared with you on Tuesday, we did not have any information about how the ESSER 2 funds could be used. And if you have had a chance to look at that document that I shared with you that I received from Anna Riley, Deputy Commissioner at RIDE, there are guiding questions, and there is a wealth of information that has to be provided as part of this application. So as Mr. DeMonica said, we need to make a distinction between the budget that we are submitting to the town mayor and town council. That is what we discussed on Tuesday, the $74,361,874. That is what we need to approve as a committee. And then there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done as part of this application process, which, by the way, has to be approved. And more importantly, even if we had the best plan that anyone could possibly create, we are not even in a position to submit our plan yet because we don't have access to the Excel grants, which is where we need to provide all of the information. That has not even been, I don't believe that RIDE has actually completed their work on their end in order for us to actually start entering information. So this is going to take some time. We today started talking as a leadership team about how the central office leadership, along with building leaders and staff, we need to start to develop a plan on how we're going to use that money. And everyone, if you've had any chance to even start to sink your teeth into what we need to complete for the application, everyone has to be involved. IT, special ed, Mr. Damana and his team, facilities, of course, the business manager. We all have to be a part of this conversation because it's not just about providing additional support bodies for mental health and learning loss. There are lots of other things that have to be considered. So I just want to emphasize that it's going to take us a significant amount of time to do this right. We have time. We even if we had data that we wanted to start to enter, we can't even do that yet because it has not been set up yet by the Department of Ed. So it's going to take us some time, and we will work collaboratively as a leadership team, and we'll keep the school committee informed every step of the way. And as I mentioned, we got to make sure we do this right because our application has to be approved. And I know we were excited on Tuesday with the possibility of hiring mental health professionals that we know we're going to need to address that particular issue. And the same is true for those individuals who are going to help with learning loss. But one of the things we've learned is there's no way that we're going to be able to hire as many individuals as we had hoped. And we also need to remember that this money is only going to be available for a specific period of time. So all of these things need to be kept in mind as we go through this process. So as Mr. DeMonica said, the most important thing that we need to do right now is approve the budget to the mayor and town council, and we'll start working on this ESSER 2 application immediately. In fact, we're already starting that process. So I don't know, Mr. Prignano, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I got a couple of things that I want to go over tonight, and then I would just add that when we finally do, come up with whatever the plan is with the ESSA dollars, I don't know if people seem to have the idea that this won't be part of the budget or whatever. It will be part of the budget. Those jobs will be included in the budget, but they will be charged off into the grant. If you look at your personnel supplement, or that you get with the budget now, and you look at almost any school, you'll see names. You won't see names, but you'll see positions, and to the right of it, at certain positions, it spells out Title I or Idea Part B or whatever. So we show the position, so the position exists, right? If you look at Title I, for example, at BF Norton, if you looked at BF Norton, if we didn't put those jobs, you'd say BF Norton has no reading teachers because they're all in Title I. So we list those positions, but we indicate next to it that it's being paid for out of the grant. And we'll do the same with these once Bob and Tony and others decide what positions they want to include, in the budget or in the ESSA money. So that was one thing. Then there were a couple other things. I had Cindy add into your folders today and yesterday a couple of sheets, and I think Mike has them. I don't know if Mike wants to put up the one with the RX rebates.
School committee, 21 April.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
As you recall, the other day, I said that there was some concern about this. I still haven't heard from the town consultant, but I did reach the woman who's at WB Community now. She used to be a business manager. She used to actually be the business manager in Coventry. And so I know her pretty well, and I got hold of her. We will not be eligible for that rebate money. So that 282,000 is going to come out of the budget. I'm not sure why Rob Calisi thinks we were getting it, but according to her, we won't be. But what she did tell me is our healthcare rate increase, if we rate ourselves alone, the town's at 5%, but she said the school department's having a little bit better year, and she thought that healthcare rate increase could only be 3%. That's a net $173,000 on that number. So a good portion of that 282, I'm able to make up with that 2% reduction. Then if we have a 3% increase in the rate, there'll be a 3% increase in the co-share, which is about 20,000. I took the unemployment down 25,000 to 100,000, which, I mean, depending on if we don't, usually we just pay for people that are laid off in the summer. If that's the norm, hopefully that 100,000 would be okay. And then I was stuck for money. There's about $127,000 in Feinstein funds all throughout the district, and we could use a portion of that to pay for some for items, some of the desks and chairs and things that are in the capital portion of school budgets and stuff like that. The more Feinstein money will come in this year to replenish those, and if we had to, we could go to that and use that 64,000. So I think we can cover that 282, and I just thought it was worth pointing out. I also did a quick sheet just so people have in mind, and this is one of the major reasons why we should kind of wait on the ESSA money to see what happens with the town budget. We still don't know what's going to happen with state aid. We're down 89 students from last year. We don't know what's going to happen with the town. And so there's a lot of unknowns there. And so on that town support slide, Mike, if you could bring that up. Thanks. What I did here is just gave you some general guidelines here of what an increase could mean. So if you look at the first one, a 4% increase at 55% collection rate, which would be the collection rate next year. They budget 45% in the current year that we're in, and 55% would be in next year. At 70%, which I would think that would be the low if they did this for us, would be $1,078,000. They gave it all to us, it'd be $1,540,000. Then I did it for 3%. You see the low would be $809,000. We'd be looking for $1 million. And the high would be $1,155,000. And then I guess someone had mentioned, at a town council meeting the other night, they were talking maybe it was Kerry or Paul or someone who mentioned it. They were talking about a 2.44% potential increase. That would only generate $658,000 for us, or $940 if they gave it all to us. These are rough numbers because I'm using $700,000 for 1%. It's not exactly that, but you would be in these areas. So this is just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the budget, depending on what our increase would be. This is how that $1,848,000 could be affected, and we would have to look for other things the town can do. And I kind of sketched out some of those things there, but the mayor or council people or other people may have some other thoughts about that. And then
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that I'm reading this right, understanding this right. So what is currently in our budget is the 4%.
$1,848,000, right?
$1,848,000. And so if the town did the 2.44, so then we're looking at a difference of 230,000-ish, right? That's what.
If the town did the 2.44 and they gave us all of it, that would give us $940,000.
Oh,
If they
so,
gave us 70% of it, because we represent about 70% of the town, that would be 658,000.
okay, so what's the 845, 460?
Oh, that was at 90%. I had done that and I just added this. This was when I was trying to get to $1.8 million number. To get, with the other things listed below, they would have to give us 90% of the money for us to get up near that $1.8 million. So for what I'm just showing you now, forget that was just 90%. If they gave us 90%, 70%, I'm giving you on the right, the high, if they gave us everything, or the worst case situation would be, I would think 70%. I don't think they'd ever give us less than 70% because we make up 70% of the budget and there's such a demand for school services,
So then that would mean, just looking at the 2.44% scenario, that it would, depending on what percentage of it that they gave to us, there would be a difference of between like 215,000 and 400,000.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, last year we got 632,000. So that would be, and I think they raised the rate 2.something% last year. So it would generate in this area $658,000. Last year we were able to sit down and the mayor did a lease for us and he did some other things to get that number up, but it wasn't maintenance of effort money. So if that's all they did, the 658, we would hope that they would find at least, and that's the problem with doing these things. If they're one time, is right next year, you're right back looking for something else to replace that one time you did the year before. So hopefully we get more in maintenance of effort than the 658.
Right.
Okay, this is a really useful exhibit here, Alex.
Yeah, I thought, so you could get an idea what we might be looking at.
Excuse me, Alex, it's Carrie Smith. If I could just ask a quick
Hi,
question.
Carrie.
Hi. If I could just ask a quick question for you for full clarification. The percentages that you are using, the 4%, the 3%, the 2.44%, and the calculations that you're coming on up to are not based on our budget. They are based on the town total.
Yeah, this was what would be generated within reason, because I don't know exactly what they collect. They collect about 55%, about 45% in the 2 years. 1% generates about 700,000. I think the mayor said maybe it might be even a little bit more, but within reason for our discussions, this is what those increases on the levy would generate. So it's their budget. So if they increased it at 2.44% at 55%, it would generate $940,000 for the town.
Right. Okay. And
If
that's
they
what I
gave us
just-
100% of it, then we would get 940. If they gave us 70% of it, it'd be 658.
Right. And that's what I wanted to clarify. And based on what the mayor had said the other day, the collection rate that they are estimating is 48.62%.
So he's a little bit higher than the 45%. And I do remember him saying the last year or so, they've done a little bit better than normal. I think
Right,
he
the
was
last
talking about
few-
maybe using a 3-year average or something.
Right. So,
Not taking the absolute highest number or the lowest number, but taking some type of average of what they've done.
right. In the last 2 years has generated and has stayed around that 49%.
So if
because of
it was
the banks taking the out of escrow.
right,
and
the higher that percentage is, the worse it is for us, because the 45% that I'm talking about comes in May and June in their first quarter, and then the 55% would come in the next 10 months,
Right.
because the first quarter is a heavy collection. So if they collected 48% in that first quarter, that means there'd only be 52% available to give us next year. And those numbers would be adjusted from 55% to 52%. So they would all go down a little bit.
Right. Right. And that's what I wanted to make sure that we all understood, that it's based upon the town's 74 million budget. And then the percentages run from there. And then like you said, what's left over, because we're getting the funding later and not in that first quarter average that they're doing with the 49% or 48, whatever percent.
So, and I just thought this might be helpful for people to have an understanding of when we say if the town raises 3%, 4%, because of the unsynchronized portion of it, this gives you a little bit of a picture of how that would work.
And Alex, the reprogram healthcare to electricity, I know that we had that in the budget in 2021. And I believe I'm correct from a finance call recently, that it was the mayor was looking to potentially take that back from us, but it's not in the budget right now.
No, what I have in the budget right now is the 1,848 from the
Right.
town, getting there somehow, some way, whether it's all in the, whether it's in the levy, whether it's in building repairs, them picking up electricity bills, whatever. So I have the 848 all in, so I leave the electricity in also.
Okay, so you're looking.
What
to
would
do
probably
that
happen
MOE.
is we would reduce the 1,848 by that number, and we would take the electricity out of our budget, and the electric bills would go to the town to pay if that scenario ever played out.
Okay, so it's
But for purposes
appropriate.
now, I show it on both sides.
Okay, so it's appropriated now in with the MOE.
Yeah, it went to 1,848, right?
Okay.
Anyone else have a question for Alex at the moment on this part? Hey, Alex, I have a couple of questions for you.
I
think
actually
that-
missed
yep.
that.
I have a quick question.
Go
Hi,
ahead.
Dennis.
Oh, I just wanted to add, you had mentioned, or you alluded to state aid. We'd received an email about an hour ago from Tim Duffy, according to the House Fiscal Staff's analysis. When it comes to enrollment, we're going to be held harmless based on the prior year.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, because of COVID, I'll forward you the email. Obviously, that's not etched in stone, but I think that's promising based
Yeah.
on some of the speculation we've been going off of. So hopefully there won't be any change to state aid. In fact, it looks like there's going to be an uptick in funding. Whether or not we were able to get any of that, I guess that remains to be seen, but it's something.
Oh, certainly is.
Alex,
Hi, Paul.
let's go back to the rebate, the 282.
Sure.
What was their reasoning for not wanting to give us the money this year?
I guess they don't, they just don't pay. Also, they also pay a dividend, which we're not entitled to the first year either, but we just don't have the credits built up yet for anything to be paid back. But she did say, based on our history of claims so far this year, that if we go off on our own and have our rate, have them do a rate, a working rate for us separately, and do the town and us separately, instead of being 5%, we would be 3% because we're having a better year at this point than the town. So there's no money to give us back, but at least we're having a year where we don't have a significant a large increase in the healthcare claims, and I had built the budget at 5%. So that 2% will offset a good portion of that.
I know that the goal for the town was to set up a reserve. Are we not sure that our rebate money is going to the town to set up their reserve?
No, yeah, it's not.
We're
It's
sure
not.
of that.
Yep. I went through numbers with the woman at WB, and there's no real money to take in yet because of when you take in, even though we're building up some money in there, you have the run out claims from last year that come into this, the claims that came in July, August, September that were older claims from a previous year, but are now in this WB community. So there's just nothing available to take out at this point. But we will build up money in there, and even if there was money, even if there was money built in, right? If you had this, our budget is such a situation with looking for every dime we can that we wouldn't have the luxury of letting the reserve stay there. The reserve we built up in the past was because we used to be subject to, in the current year budget of, significant claims came in. There was no place to, we weren't paying a working rate where those significant claims would be figured into the next year's rate where we would have time to adjust. They were in the current year budget. So we built up that $450,000 in case we were having a really bad year sometime and we were going to have a budget deficit. I would
Right.
scoop that 450 in order to balance the budget. We had years where we overspent the claims, but I left that 450 in there because we were able to balance the budget without taking it in. But I don't think it's as important to have that reserve anymore as we did. And like we did a month or so ago, we took that reserve, we actually started moving it to build up money to get past this
Well,
curriculum thing
We
that we're
agreed
gonna have to deal with.
back when
Right.
WB came into play that, it didn't matter that we had a reserve anymore because we could always change the working rate to cover the expenses going forward. But,
Yeah,
the big
next
sell
year.
from, WB was we're gonna kick back the healthcare rebate, the prescription rebates directly to you and the town. And that was the selling point to having WB around.
Yeah. Yeah. No, their reports that they generate for us, and Ray and I would meet with Rob Calisi on a regular basis. They have the school claims and they have it all, it's all broken separately. We're not commingled at all with them.
Okay. All right, anyone else have a question for Alex, anything, or the superintendent, special ed? Go ahead, Mr. Fiorello.
Alex, I know we do this every year where we pass a budget and then we wait for the town and other mitigating factors, and then we reconcile the budget and create what I like to call the real budget, in May, June, that area.
Yes. So,
It
yeah,
sounds like
usually,
this
yeah,
year-
June or whatever, right?
Yeah, it sounds like this year it's going to be more complicated because we're not really sure what the state's going to do. We don't know exactly how S is going to figure into all of this. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, I think
perception?
we will have a lot more of that information by, June, the end of June or whatever, when the town passes its budget. But that's why if we act on the superintendent's budget, however we act on it, those ESSA jobs, you've got 3 years to spend that money. Even if we pass a budget and if it takes you to August to know what you're doing with that money before school starts, before you would hire some of those, we can always go in and amend our budget because they won't really impact any of the general fund because we're looking at ESSA paying, the salaries, the fringes, all that type of stuff for those positions. So, and I think it's important to get some type of budget so that people have line items and they know what they have to spend and stuff like that when they want to start doing that in June and July. Principals want to start ordering things and Katie wants to hire people.
Has there been any discussion anywhere at any level about using previous year numbers of free and reduced lunch to provide us with our regular funding?
I've heard a rumor only that they may look at a 3-year average.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor kicking around, but
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
that is correct. In our superintendent's meetings, that I mean, if I was a gambling man, and I'm not, but if I were, I would bet the ranch that is what they're going to do. It'll be, they understand the circumstances and they are going to do exactly that. That's fair, and reasonable under the circumstances.
yeah, assuming they actually do that.
I think they will. I do think they will.
I'm old fashioned. I like to wait until I see the money in my hand. So
Yeah, you're old fashioned and no one's going to disagree with that.
Right.
So, Mr.
Go
Chair,
ahead. Yeah,
so just in terms of the timeline, again, as Mr. Fiorello was kind of speaking to, I believe our timeline or our date for any staff non-renewals due to budgetary reasons is June 1st. Is that right? So that is when we would have to, not that this is just thinking, we looked at this 2.44% here, if that's where we might be heading, which we from here can say that's about a $450,000 potential difference. And especially for the new members, so that you just understand the timeline here. It's a really tricky timeline because we're going to submit the budget and then the mayor's going to look at it, and then he will submit it by May, no later than the second Monday in May. He submits it to the town council. They then will discuss this, and there'll be public budget workshops, hearings and all of that. That could conclude by the first Monday in June. But if we find ourselves in a tough situation, non-renewals need to go out June 1st, and then the budget still continues. So it's not a great sequential process in terms of the timing.
No. I mean,
Mr.
by May-
Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Mitchell.
forgive me for interrupting, Mr. Chairman. I also think it's really important that the sooner we can decide on how we want to use the ESSER money, even though, like, Alex says, we have time, but what we don't, there's going to be a lot of competition for talent. And I think the longer we wait, right, the longer we wait, the more likely we'll be to not get those high-end possibilities working in the district. So I just wanted to, make sure that everyone understands the ramifications of waiting longer than we should, because there is definitely going to be some competition. Thank you.
Mr. Collins, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
I do, and I want to jump off of what Mrs. Friedman was saying. I think there's going to be obviously a lot of stuff that has to be worked out, but I do like operating under, I don't want to say the assumption, but moving forward with a 4% levy, even if it's 70%, which I think is a fair estimate. The budget presented, considering where we were last year, there's no proposed cuts to the arts. There's no proposed cuts to, athletics or anything like that. I do have concerns. I mean, under the circumstances, I think this is a good budget. It's not perfect, obviously, it never is. I do have concerns about the lack of raises embedded in there, especially given the context of the last year and what both teachers and administrators have been through. But ideal, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's good. It's good enough for me tonight to move forward to approve this budget to send to the town. So I'm ready to move forward tonight.
Okay, Mr. Rogalski. I mean, Mrs. Rogalski.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Dennis. I'm ready to move forward on it. But just a question, since there are no cuts, since I am new to this, say they come back having only done the 2.44% at 70%, then we have to find that 420 something thousand. So that would then be cuts, potential cuts to arts, athletics, etc. Okay. And
Amy, I don't know exactly why you're saying 400. There's $1,848,000 built in from the town. If you got the 70% at 2.44, 658, you'd be looking at nearly $1.2 million that you would have to find. I'm hoping that some of these things on the left-hand side, electricity, building repairs, playgrounds, would be some of the things they would use, but there's no guarantee of that.
Okay.
I think the mayor would do everything he can to get us up more than the 658.
Okay.
But from the $1,848,000 that's built in as maintenance of effort, we'd be looking for $1.2 million, not 400,000.
Okay, so even more cuts to arts and sports and other things.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I just didn't want you to think it was better.
No, that's
rosier
fine.
than it is.
That's fine. I'm still waffling my way through all of this.
Yeah.
So my next question, the ESSER money and how we use it, that doesn't go to the town for approval, or does it?
No, I don't believe it. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's the school department in consultation with the school committee developing a plan on how to apply for that money.
Okay.
No, the town, just like anything in our budget, they approve a bottom line, but how it's spent, the town does not have any jurisdiction over that. They have a jurisdiction over what the bottom line is, And the bottom line for the ESSA funds is already set. There's
Right.
no, they can't increase it, they can't reduce it, it's set.
Okay, and so with the whopping 48 hours you've had to review the guidelines for the ESSER money, that you don't see anything that they did affecting the budget. Am I correct in that? Even if it doesn't affect the budget that you've proposed, that we see here that we've been looking at?
I would say just, and again, I'm being a little impulsive here, but I would suggest that since we are almost 100% sure that we cannot supplant, the funds that we already have in place or have had in place, that we cannot use the ESSA money for anything that is already in place. I know there are several of my colleagues on the call. Would you agree with that, Alex?
Yes, I would.
Okay,
Well,
so
If I could
Go
just add, if
Yeah,
you
go
don't mind, Amy. The difference could be that with the ESSER money, we have a number of positions that
Yeah.
Mr. Devon they have all been looking at to add. If they can't use that ESSER money in all the ways that they want to, because that's what I'm hearing is that a certain percentage has to go to programs versus personnel. And so say if that meant we couldn't add, I'll just say the mental health workers that Tony showed on Tuesday night, how that could impact the budget is if we said we need to put those positions in our budget, but then that increases the budget,
Right.
and now the gap just gets bigger. So there is some correlation between, in terms of what do we want to do for mental health and learning loss, and we don't know if we can do all of that now with the regulations around the ESSER money. So.
And so if we approve this tonight, this will be presented by the 5th, or are we still aiming to present it by the 12th to the mayor?
Which date?
If we vote on it, then
If we vote on it,
mayor, right?
It goes to if we vote on this tonight, it goes to the finance director for the town of Cumberland.
And
Who,
then, I'm sorry.
that's right, who gets to review it, then he gives it to the mayor. The mayor makes his presentation eventually to the Cumberland Town Council. We'll then have a minimum of 2 public hearings, and then they'll take a vote, usually within days of each hearing.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the mayor to sign it.
Okay. Yeah, I meant more because we had asked for the extension to deliver it to the mayor until April 12th. So I'm
Well,
just wondering, do
I
we still
thought-
need that? That's all.
No, it doesn't appear we're gonna need that
Okay.
after speaking with the
Well, that's all.
superintendent.
Well, can I add something to
Go
that?
ahead.
Because if Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Devana, and Dr. Santa and everyone, they're going to be looking at this ESSER money. If they then say after that evaluation that we cannot support all of these positions and that they recommend we add those positions to the budget, if we've already submitted the budget to the mayor, we then can't add those positions to the budget. Is that right? Mr. Ferrell, you're shaking your head. I'm not sure if you're saying yes or no.
Well, the 4% that we're asking the town is still gonna be the
We
4%. that
can't
we're
ask for
asking.
more than that.
We can't ask for more than 4%. They can give us more than 4%, but the school systems cannot ask for that, anything over 4.
And-
It's stuck.
And
And-
once
and
they
as
approve the
Alex-
money, it's up to us to spend it. So
Right,
they have
as
no say.
Alex has
personnel.
said, that if you want to add positions into the budget, that we're all welcome to make that, recommendation that we add the curriculum person to Mr. Demana's, for the high school, that we have to find a correlation cut in the budget so it offsets one and the other.
So then
No.
to Mrs. Rogalski's point, there's nothing else for us to add to this budget dollar wise. I mean, we've got the max 4%, that's all we can request. So this is our budget as it is. If they discover, whatever they discover through the ESSER money, then it's figuring out how do we make those adjustments within the budget that we have,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So then to the question, we don't necessarily need to extend our deadline to submitting it to the mayor, because it seems like the dollar amount to the dollar amount.
We're seeking the full 4% no matter what. And hope that he sees that way to make that same recommendation to the council. The council could change it and say, we're not going to do 2.5, we're going to do 3.5 to bring more money in. But if we've got to get the town council to agree on the levy that's going to get presented in the next 2 weeks to them. Because there's no change, there's nothing they do when they vote on the budget in June that can change the levy that they put in April, because we're unsynchronized when it comes to the town taxes.
Yeah, the whole process is playing out in the next couple of weeks for our request for 4%. Not when we go there in June and make a presentation on our budget, the die's been cast.
Right, Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, I think we also need to keep in mind that there is additional recovery money that we have no idea exactly how much and how that will be able to be spent. So I think that's encouraging as well. So there's more money coming in that hopefully will help us.
Right.
And Paul, Carrie had her hand up. She's a
Mrs. Smith, go ahead.
committee member.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
It's all right.
Just a few things to point out. One, the proposal that is out there with the state and with the governor's recommendations right now will give us some more money, but based upon the data they have, their numbers for 2021 and our numbers for 2021 don't quite align with the state aid. And that's in that newest document that just came out from Tim Duffy today.
Right.
But that looks like it's only going to be about 150,000 that we would have less of a loss than whatever that amount was that we were looking at losing this year.
800,000.
Right. So it doesn't appear to be a large number. It would be nice if it was more, but just a few things. The SR2 funds and whatever other funds may be coming into us that we don't know from the recent federal funding, those, if they go in the budget, they need to go in as non-MOE. Is that correct, Alex? Because those are one-time deals and we're not carrying that forward. And I think it's important to understand that if we put all of these positions in all at one time and we use all that money for it, then the following year, we're going to be back to where we are today. So I think that we need to look at that and make sure that we understand how we're going to be able to integrate with the budget and the SR2 funds and then future funding.
The only maintenance of FIT funds are the town appropriation.
Right.
Anything that comes from the federal government, there's no repeat. There's no maintenance of FIT. Well, they gave it to you once, they got to give it to you again. That's
in the paperwork for the governor and the governor's recommendation. He has asked for it to be MOE. So if we are going to get additional funds, he is saying you need to figure out how this is going to carry forward. And that's what he's presented and requested of the General Assembly. So what they come out of it, we're not going to know. And because their sessions don't end until June 30th, there's a good potential we won't know if there's adjustments until that time.
Right.
So just something to keep in mind. The other thing is, I completely understand why we're looking at 4%. I do think that we've been lean, and that has shown in the past. And I know a lot of the public does look at this and says, school committee just comes in every year and the schools come in and they always say they need 4%. And I don't want to see that argument happen in the public again. So I just want to make sure that we're prepared on what potentially may have to be cut if we need to lower it, say, to 3%. And the second part of that is, I want to understand before approving this about the guidance positions. Guidance made a very clear recommendation to the school department and to administration. And of all times for those positions to be cut, last year probably was the worst time for it to happen. So I don't understand now, how are we going to get them back in? And I think Superintendent Mitchell, you said that you are going to be working some guidance positions back into the budget that you have presented, but I just want to confirm that that is going to be the case.
I don't recall saying that specifically. And if I did, I misspoke. There are no, other than TAs, there are no new positions in this budget. And sadly, if we decided to put school counselors back in, then we would have to decide together what comes out. So if that goes in, something else comes out. So, and let me just be clear. I mean, I think anyone who has watched the budget process over the years knows that I have definitely advocated for school counselors, because even before the pandemic, there was a rise in anxiety and depression in this country and in the state of Rhode Island. And so I was, leading that charge. It wasn't just me, but so it is disturbing to me that we're in a position where we have to remove anything from the budget. So this budget does not include any new positions.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I apologize if I, was not clear on that. So I do apologize if I led you to believe that those positions were going back in.
And I apologize. I could have misunderstood. I didn't think that those positions were going back in that were going to be increasing the budget. I knew that only 8 new positions, which were TA, were in the budget. But I thought that perhaps there was some movement or reallocation of resources that were going to add some of the counselors. Now, I do understand, and I think Dr. Santa pointed it out to us the other day, we need not just guidance counselors. We need the psychological aspect of it, and psychiatrists or whatever it may be to help come in. My biggest concern is we're going to have it in. We already know we have a problem with the guidance and the resources they have now. So what is going to happen after this year, after those funds are gone? Are we going to be back in a position again that we are absolutely going to have to add guidance back in or someone else back in? And that has me concerned that we're just not covering that enough in the budget now. And we should be looking at and preparing on how we can arrange that.
Mrs. Smith, I think that was on a separate sheet that we saw on Tuesday night about adding the positions back in. I think it was through Mr. Demona's presentation. I'm not 100% sure.
Yes, that was, but I think,
And-
Paul, I thought I had heard it a few months ago or a few weeks ago, so I apologize
Right.
if I misunderstood it somewhere.
I think as a school committee as a whole, we have talked about how we want to see changes happen, throughout the district, not including the high school, that we felt guidance was certainly being undercut for what they should be doing there. And I think Mr. Demona wanted a curriculum person that for the high school that reported directly to him and get things, moving. Let's face it, you go from elementary to middle, and then he's not in charge of the high school. And there has to be some way of that control being taken back to his office. He is the assistant superintendent, and his job, big job is curriculum with his staff. So we all want to see those jobs in the budget for this year coming up. We want to see them. Problem we have is whatever we do with the ESSA money and we get those people in, if we can't stretch it 2 years, okay, a year from now, we're going to be cutting all those jobs again.
Mhm.
You know, that's the problem we have. Mrs. Wagowski?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ms. Smith, I think what you're thinking of is Mr. Demana's presentation at Achievement, and what they're reallocating is the MLL, the interventionists, and the the MLL teachers and the intervention specialists for ELA and math. 'Cause I just pulled it up when I was looking at it. But yeah, that's the reallocation part.
Right, and I did
The
understand
guidance
that.
counselors wanted reallocation, though I agree with everything you're saying, but sadly, there's just not money right now for it. But maybe we could submit a wish list to the council ferry, and they can just
Right.
give us money.
Yeah, and I did think that I had heard it and it was separate on the reallocation. I did think that for some reason we are going to find a way to put a few guidance counselors back in with what we have. So I apologize. I must have dreamt it and thought it was, raining down confetti. So thank you though.
Mr. Collins?
Just to jump on that thought, one of the things that I'm comfortable with is Mr. Mitchell and everybody else's declarations that this ESSA money, between not just staving off learning loss, but with mental health services being kind of a priority. I agree. I have serious concerns about obviously the counselor to student ratio is far below the national suggested average based on the presentation from a month or so ago. But I think if we're able to supplement it with some mental health services contracted or whatever Dr. Santa and everybody else decides is best, I think that would help alleviate a lot of, if they're able to kind of identify issues and if they're able to provide the limited, skeleton crew of the counselors we have are able to refer to people in-house for services, I think that it helps. It's not perfect, but it definitely helps. I don't want to speak on behalf of the guidance team, but will it not help? I thought I saw a head shaking. So hopefully it helps.
Okay. Mr. Demana, did you want to speak about any of this?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I just wanted to clarify something, and I apologize for not making it more clear when I presented the information at Achievement. When we talk about reallocation of resources, what we're really saying is staying within the same position and potentially sending it to another building. But there's no cut in something and then adding it somewhere else. It would come before you. If we were to swap a position out to let's say, cut an interventionist and add an essentials teacher, that's a reallocation of resources in theory, but it would come before you as a cut and an add. So vocabulary wise, when I say reallocation or when Rachel uses that word, we're usually referring to a position to position, building to building. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I do have one other thing.
Go ahead.
We do know that for sure that we learned recently that 25% of the ESSER 2 monies, which would be about $566,000 or so roughly, would not be able to be allocated to positions. So that right there is different from the information you received on Tuesday.
Right.
So you're looking at a 1.6 million versus a $560,000 split. So there's 1.5 that we can play with in a lot of different ways. It's not just positions that you can use the money for. And the 560,000 has to be used in programs, subpopulation, supporting students of poverty, L students, special ed students, all that stuff. So I know that that's not for tonight, but I just wanted to give you that little bit of information because we do have clarity on that. Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Chair.
Yeah,
Mr.
I
Demana.
understand that. You go ahead, Mr. Fiorillo.
Thank you, Mr. Monica. When you say programs, though, can you explain, or do you have any idea, or maybe Dr. Santa, what those programs would be that would qualify? Because I know most programs will require additional staff, but are those staff going to be counted towards the other pile of money?
I'll give you the general answer and then I'll let Rachel give you the more specifics. So after school programs would qualify within the schools. Any type of addition or annex that Rachel would want to get into with ESY programs, if she wanted to expand that. Right now, Lindy and Shannon and Kathy Deb, they're working on identifying, I believe, 366 students who are identified as intensive, and they're working with Rachel and her office on that. Those students would be, we already are preparing, those students would be eligible to receive some type of either summer school program, after school program over the course of a few years. So we don't have to spend that money in 1 year. And there's a lot of ways to look at that $500,000. You know, we could either look at it as providing an equitable share to all 8 buildings, or we can look at it from a population standpoint. You know, basically the larger schools get a little bit more, you know, from a proportionate share versus other schools. So there's a lot of ways that we can go about it, but that's what the programs would entail, generally speaking. Rachel, I don't know if you want to add anything.
So just to go back to mental health. So when we were talking about ESSER funds, prior to COVID, we're woefully low in mental health support. Taking guidance to the side, we don't have enough social workers, we don't have enough school psychologists, and frankly, I don't have enough speech pathologists. But the reality is our budget has never supported adding additional positions. So what we do is reallocate. I move from here, I move to there. It's this creative process every year to try to get us covered. When ESSER money came about, if we could use it for some positions, before I realized it's similar to the ARA money that we received back in 2008, 2009, where if we use it for positions, we're just going to be cutting them in a year and a half. For the most part, the majority of them you can't keep, and it becomes a huge funding cliff. So we've been talking about, and then obviously we also got more information. I can't use it for, you know, more than 75% of the pieces, but I would not recommend at this point using people, because we're just going to sit here and have them leave in a year and a half. And the problem with that is people have not gotten used to having those positions, and then they're gone. It's much harder than just living with what you got. So I'll just start with that. We're woefully low. To have 3 social workers and 6 school psychologists for almost 4,600 students is indescribable. That being said, for programs, there's some things I am recommending regarding infrastructure for intervention, our MLL students, our special ed students, and our tier 2, tier 3 students that need some really intensive instruction. Those 360 or so students that Tony is talking about are all students who are in the red. That's not even getting into the students that are in the yellow. So the ones that are considered to have the most amount of need and most amount of intervention. And they are more heavily in 3 of our schools in comparison to the other schools. So when we sit to talk about around that $500,000 for programmatic things, we're really going to have to think systematically. What can we build into our systems, our infrastructure of our systems, that's going to be long lasting? When I think of long lasting, I'm thinking things 3 to 8 years, that if we put this in place, that we can build upon. Things like one of the ideas I'm looking at, this is not written in stone, we're still exploring it, Lindy and I, is looking at a Fontes and Pinnell diagnostic system and then intervention, so that we can have a systematic approach to our MLL intervention kids and special ed kids. That's just one idea, and that would go across all schools. So, you know, we really have to think about, my opinion and my recommendation is thinking about systemic change, things that we are expensive, that we purchase, but you don't have to keep you know, paying every single year, renewing, so that we can build and sustain over time. And things like those intervention systems will help us do that.
Dr. Santa, just to clarify, MLL is multi-language learning?
Multilingual, yeah, that's the state's calling that instead of ELL now. They're wanting to call special ed differently abled, but we have found that that to be an offensive term to a lot of our children with disabilities, so we're not using that term. That is the term they've been asking us to use, but it's also not in our regulations, so we haven't been using that. But you might hear it, is what I'm saying. If you hear differently abled, they mean special education.
It's in the guidance that we received from RIDE. It's on every single solitary.
Yeah, and the special ed directors in the state have chosen not to use that term because of some feedback we got from families.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Dr. Santa, do you have recommendations then? I mean, you don't obviously have to do it tonight, it's a budget hearing, but do you have suggestions then, since the idea of just adding staff that we may lose may be counterproductive? Do you have recommendations to address mental health? Because it sounds like you were just talking about learning loss, which we obviously talk quite a bit about in achievement. Do you have any ideas? No, and do you have a general?
Yeah, my recommendation that I made as part of the ESSER presentation is my recommendation for mental health. Because the question I was asked was, do you think you need for mental health? You know, guidance is tier 1, but we need, and our social workers can be tier 1, tier 3, and they have a level of flexibility. And school psychologists also do that whole component, as well as they do a lot. And I think there's this assumption that like social work or school psychology is only special ed. They spend more time with the regular ed population, including the referral process, than they do for our special ed population. They don't really have time to work as much as we'd like to see them. So my recommendation was as standard, and that is just what I thought would make us adequate. And I'm talking about dealing with a pandemic. Unless there's a huge infusion of money, which this district, we just don't have it. So it's not like it's not been recommended, it hasn't thought of. We did add another social worker and a school psychologist over the last couple of years, but then we end up having to cut because if you don't, there's nowhere to go. We're so thin that any year when you don't get the money you expect, there's nowhere to go. And it's incredibly frustrating. And I don't want to get upset, but it upsets me because I cannot provide the level of what we should be providing for the students in this district. And I can't provide it because we don't have the funding. It's not because we don't have the talent. You have phenomenal staff members. We have phenomenal mental health people. And that the fact that we have one social worker running between 5 schools, I mean, and that she's able to handle that to some degree is just, it's crazy. So, you know, my recommendation is as was the other night was what's for adequate. If you're talking about a full comprehensive system, that's a completely different plan. I could whip that out in an hour because I already know what we should be doing. I don't know what to tell you. There's just not the money to do it. It's like, if we put that in, who do I cut? And if we have to have a teacher in front of kids, you can't cut a teacher. You know, I don't have an assistant director. That's on purpose. I haven't asked for that. I don't need it. I'd rather have another school psychologist. I'd rather have a speech pathologist. I would rather we have to have those TAs, or I'll be sending kids out to our district placements that over a 19-year period is going to cost the district almost $2 million. So I'm trying to save now and for the future. You know, I don't know what to say. I'm frustrated. And I know it's not anyone here's fault. It's a frustrating process. So I'll stop at that.
Well, I mean, I know Rachel is preaching to the choir, and you know, I would like to point out that is just one department. I think we would agree that if we had the resources, there are other things that we would like to do, and certainly there's no question that we are. Do not have the mental health support, specifically social workers and psychologists, that other districts do. I mean, and you know, there's a reason why we spend less than anybody else per pupil. And that's one of the issues. And we're always in a situation where we got to make sure that there are talented people standing in front of students for the entire school day, and you know, it is the special professional help that we need to add in the district. So, you know what, like Rachel said, you know, we're preaching to the choir here, but you know, it is one of the frustrating things, and going through this budget process, and I know that you will all feel the same way, is one of the more frustrating responsibilities that we all have to deal with. So it's like, pick your poison, you know, what stays and what goes.
Mrs. Friedman?
And so I don't know how we can't ask for the full 4% from the town. We're not asking for 4% to bring us above adequate. We're not asking for 4% to give people raises and to add new positions and to do what we know we need to do. We're asking for 4% to try to keep our head above water. And that is frustrating. And I know, you know, I can totally hear where Ms. Smith is coming from in terms of the ESSER money, that if we use it for positions, a year from now, we may be back in the same position again. But it feels like, unfortunately, it's like we're living day to day here, 1 year at a time, and we don't have a 3-year strategy for how do we get out of this. And it's like, what else can you do? You look at where the revenue is coming from and try to figure out what else could we do. I just don't know how we can't ask for the full 4%.
Right. Mrs. Smith, I just wanted to give you what you had made a comment earlier about the public's going to say, oh, they're asking for 4% again. Why? Part of the answer you can say to those that come up and ask you is, well, the 4% that we're asking for also includes the increase we have to give the BVP. And we don't
Right.
have a say, and the other part is the Cumberland School Committee is going to go to the mayor and the town council looking for funding. And BVP and all the other charter schools in the state are not going to show up in front of Cumberland Town Council and advocate for money because the state's going to tell us how much we have to give them from the get-go. So that's a big distinction. And our governor says, how well they're doing, and Cumberland never had a deficit. Well, we got money from the state. We didn't get it from the town. And if the town gave it and didn't supplant it, we wouldn't be having this argument because they would have given us a lot more money. So, but those are some of the things you can say to people is, we're covering the charter school again, and they're not coming in front of the town council and go from there.
It's worth noting too, Mr. DeMonica, if you read through Tim Duffy's presentation and what the governor has suggested, the increase that he has for the school system, so that's what, 36 districts, and then he took a few away from that, but it's to split 25.1 million additional funds. Charter schools have 9.8 million that he is requesting that they get. So
Right.
charter is looking at almost 10 million, and all the other public schools are looking at 25 million to split.
Right.
That I have a problem with.
Yeah.
So, and
It's a real
especially
problem.
in light of other things that have happened over the past year. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. Unless there's any other questions for any of the panelists that are here tonight, I need a motion to approve go ahead,
I'm
Mrs.
sorry.
Smith.
I do have just two comments.
Go
First,
ahead.
Dr. Santa, thank you very much, Dr. Santa, for looking at the technology side of it, because I think anything that you can systemically put into place is fantastic. And I really hope that during having all that extra money with ESSER or whatever future money comes in, that can be beneficial to you and your team. And then the only other thing I had was a question. How often do we review our additional curriculum? And I think that would probably be middle school and high school. We offer, I don't even know how many courses. And I'm just wondering, how often do we review those to determine whether or not they need to stay in rotation, or if it's a lacking program that we could save on?
Go ahead, Mr. DeMond.
Well, with the exception of when RIDE passes legislation that puts conditions in place where you're forced to do so, we have a policy on curriculum where we use data-driven decisions. We look at years worth of data to see if we're growing, whether or not we ourselves are making the mistakes, whether it's the curriculum, whether we see patterns across schools, across grade levels. So we look at not just data, statistics from our office and the way that we're designed, along with special education. And we think with how we approach curriculum, we have a really good understanding of when the curriculum isn't producing the results, or whether it's by virtue of us needing to do more. And we have that outlined in policy.
And I apologize, Mr. Demana, I'm thinking more along the lines of elective courses. I don't know Yeah, I know our
Oh.
core curriculum and what you do, but
Yep.
do we do an analysis of elective courses and programs, even for those that are signing up from out of town? Do we do those regularly, annually, or is it a 3-year path?
The high school, I know they're constantly updating their program of study and offering all different types of courses. At the middle school level, it's a little bit more restrictive because when you remove one type of elective course, in order to add one, you've got to remove one because we have, certain time constraints. So that makes it really, really challenging, elementary and middle school.
And,
Mr.
sorry.
If I may,
Fiorello, then superintendent.
Yeah,
Uh,
I just want to point out one thing that and I'm not sure this is what you meant, Miss Smith, because I've heard this argument from others, is that we should, maybe reduce a teacher or something for, like get rid of whatever. But the public needs to remember that those students need someplace to be at that time every day. So even if we were to shut down one program, we'd have to open up something else or another class or something, which would require an additional teacher no matter what. So again, yeah, and I understand that, because quite honestly, if I had my druthers, as they say, I would increase the number of kindergarten teachers throughout the district to make those class sizes very small. But that's another pipe dream that I have, among others.
Yeah, and I think it was just to understand. I know that when the scheduling was happening at the beginning of the year, there was some 800 different paths that had to be looked at in classes, and so I'm just wondering, are we oversaturated with electives? Do we have the right ones in place? Do we have enough students in them? So that was all my question.
We'll go to Mr. Mitchell and then Mrs. Friedman. Go ahead, Mr. Mitchell.
I would ask Mrs. Friedman to go first, ladies first, and then I'll go first. And then I'll.
So traditional. So I just wanted to ask Ms. Smith, so were you asking more specifically about elective courses at the high school?
I think they're probably more at the high school. I know there's some in the middle school, but
No, I think that
we
is a
went to
really
school.
good question. I think that is a really good question, and one that I don't think that we've done a great deal of analysis on. And that I think is another area when we talk with Mr. Devana about his office and what they oversee and all of that, that's, not necessarily in their remit. And, I mean, somebody will probably have my head for saying it, but, we like to say that we offer, as an example, 30 AP classes, but it doesn't mean that we run 30 AP classes. And then it may mean that we're running some classes with very small numbers. And is that, the right balance too?
Go ahead, Mr. Mitchell. Now,
I think that's a nice segue into what I wanted to say about elective courses and class sizes and that sort of thing. One of the things that we have really focused our attention on because of our financial situation is not running classes that are too small, right? So there is a cutoff, I believe it's 15. Anything less than 15, we don't even consider running those classes. In fact, you may recall, we have in the past decided to eliminate sections, and there was an uproar from the public because we eliminated French 4. So we had to put it back in, and there was like 8 kids or 9 kids, right? So we have taken those steps. That being said, we actually had a conversation with Mr. Costa within the last month or so. It was definitely during the budget process, and we asked him to do a review of those elective courses. And I think, and I think the point that Mr. Fiorillo made is really important, and that is, if there are 25 students interested in taking an elective course, and that course is eliminated, those 25 kids are going to go someplace else. So it may not necessarily put us in a position where we can reduce positions. I think there are, folks who believe that by reducing the number of electives that are available, that you're somehow going to reduce the number of positions necessary in the high school. So I do think, I think we can always do better, but I do think the administration does a good job of making sure that there are that sections are not small, that they cannot be that small that we cannot justify, paying an excessive amount of money for a section of a particular class. That being said, Mr. Acosta has been told that he needs to do a review of all elective courses, and that will take place over the course of the summer.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you, Superintendent Mitchell.
Mr. Fiorello?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Ms. Smith's main point of, reviewing all these programs to make sure that we are, getting the most bang out of our buck, really. I know that last year there was talk of cutting some class sizes, like Mr. Mitchell mentioned, like French 4. And one of the other arguments we had from parents and students was that we were thinking of cutting certain classes that seniors needed to go to college with under their belt. So there's always that consideration too, making sure kids are on their track to be where they need to be when they graduate. Nothing is easy.
Nothing is easy. You're absolutely right. Well, if there's no other questions in regards to the budget, Mr. Pignano, I just want to make sure the amount is correct. It's $74,361,874. You are muted. There you go.
It's actually you're going to take that $282,000 rebate out.
282.
Yeah, well, it's 200. Yeah. Why don't
Alright,
I,
So I have a calculator.
okay.
74,361.
Yeah, let me figure it out, because some of these changes were increased revenues, and just give me a second, Paul.
Okay.
I wasn't
We'll go from
expecting
there.
you to take this action right away here.
While Mr. Pignano is doing this again, Mrs. Friedman said the other night, we've got to reach out to the members of the town council, the mayor as well, and advocate for that 4% increase that we're seeking. And normally what we do is we go to the PTO, meet people as well. We get them involved to pick up the phone and send emails to the town to seek that, maximum amount of, money that we're looking for. We don't have job cuts on today, but let's remember, we did lay off all those teachers already, those, non-tenured teachers. And we don't have an opportunity to call them back until we know what the budget's going to look like as well. So there could be job loss here, and we don't want that. So I urge you all to reach out to the council and the mayor. And we reach out to the PTOs as well to let them understand what we're looking to do here, because it's very important. For every 0.5%, 1/4% we don't get, it's something we have to cut. Thank you. All right, Mr. Pignano, the number
Yep,
is?
Paul, what you're going to do is you're going to take that $74 million number and you're going to reduce it on each side of the budget, revenues and expenditures, by $198,000.
So what's the dollar amount?
Well,
198,000?
198,000 even.
All right, so I have a number of $74,163,874.
Right, 74, 163, 874.
Correct.
Yep,
So I
that'll be
need
the number.
someone to make a motion to approve the superintendent's recommended budget for the 22 school year in the amount of $74,163,874.
Make that motion to approve.
Mr. Collins makes the motion,
Second,
second by Mrs. Friedman, and Mrs. Smith,
Rogalski, Mrs. Rogalski, actually.
Rogalski
No.
too. Well, that's all. Hey, we're all in favor of this, so I'll just put us all down, because that's what it really comes down to. Any discussion, further discussion in regards to this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it 6-0 with Mrs. Feather absent tonight. Okay, that will be, Mr. Prignano, you have the school committee's recommendation to send this to the finance director for the town.
It's Paul, kind of funny, when Ray left, they were, the mayor and I talked, I said I'd help out any way I could down there if they needed me. I think he's all set. I think they're interviewing someone, but it would have been funny if I was down there. I would have been sending this to myself.
Well, then you can approve it yourself.
Yeah, you're getting the
Very helpful.
4%.
All right, next on the agenda is public comment. Mrs. Freeman, do you want to take that over, or do you want me to just continue along?
You can continue.
Okay, fine. Mr. Chandler, do you see anyone in the audience tonight? I can only see what's on my screen that would like to have public comment in regards to the budget.
At this point, I don't see anybody with their hands up.
You don't see anyone with their hands up. Okay, we'll give it a minute here, and then we'll move for an adjournment here momentarily. This is the shortest time that I've ever seen. People didn't talk about the budget, but Mrs. Smith, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for answering my telephone calls or my emails, and also taking the time to go through my hundreds of questions with the budget. I just wanted to feel comfortable before being able to approve it. So thank you, each and every one of you, for all the extra time that you've spent going through all of this for us and answering our questions.
You're certainly welcome. Okay, hearing nothing for public comment, I need a motion to, oh, go ahead, Mr. Collins.
Oh, you're muted.
There you go.
Dennis Collins, 5 Wedgewood Drive. I wanted to just wish everybody, if you celebrate Easter, happy Easter. And I know we're in the middle of Passover, so happy Passover. And if you don't celebrate anything, enjoy the weekend. So.
Okay, need a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mrs. Rogalski,
Second.
second by Mr. Collins and Mrs. Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it 6-0. Thank you all, and good night, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Demana,
Good night.
Mrs.
Thank you.
Demonic, Mr.
Thanks, everyone.
Malcolm.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.